you have anything to say to the victims? Anything to say to their families?
We're following a shocking bombshell twist in the case of an expectant mom and dad executed along with their unborn child. That video is per KSAT-TV in San Antonio. One of the key figures in this case, who was accused of helping cover up the executions, is facing charges no more. Why the charges were dropped against this woman who was arrested in January of 2024 in a case where Savanah Soto, unborn baby Fabian, and Matthew Guerra were killed. But even though the charges were dropped, we'll look into whether that means Myrta Romanos is innocent of the accusations. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Hey, before we start this episode of On the Case, I do need to talk about our partner and sponsor for this episode, Upside. It's a free app that gives you cash back when you buy daily essentials like gas and groceries. Upside's easy to use, it's free. I use it a lot when I pump gas, maybe go to a convenience store or a fast food joint. And we're talking about real cash back here. So when you spend, money will appear in your Upside account, then you just transfer it straight to your bank. Here's what you do. Download the Upside app for free, buy whatever you plan to purchase. You pay like you normally would with a debit or credit card, then you file a claim in the app, and then you get money right back to you. So to find out how much you could save with Upside, click the link in the description or scan the QR code on our screen and use promo code OTC to get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. All right, let's dive into this. Myrta Romanos' trial was supposed to start this week with jury selection, but then the judge made a shocking decision. Now, this woman, she's the stepmom of a man accused of killing a woman who was just about to give birth, her unborn baby and the baby's dad. This stepmom was facing charges of tampering with a human corpse, abuse of a corpse, and tampering with physical evidence. This is video of Myrta Romanos appearing in court from jail during a bond hearing 5 months ago. Now, before we get into why her charges were dropped, I want to get you back up to speed on this shocking case that goes all the way back to 2023. This is 18-year-old Savanah Soto. She lived in San Antonio. She was an expectant mom. She and her boyfriend, Matthew Guerra, were expecting a baby boy. His name was going to be Fabian. Now, Savanah was going to be induced at the end of December in 2023, but then she and her boyfriend vanished. On December 23rd, just 2 days before Christmas, Savanah's mom posted on social media, quote, "My daughter is missing. She was scheduled to be induced at 6:30 p.m. and never showed up. If you see her, please reach out to me and let me know where you've seen her. I'm worried about her safety. She is with her boyfriend who is no good. Prayer for my baby girl." Now, her mom posted that on Facebook on Saturday. By Monday, Christmas morning, police had put out an alert that they were looking for Savanah, and by Tuesday, they also had an alert out for Matthew, Savanah's boyfriend. He was missing as well. The day after Christmas, well, that day came the discovery, which was the worst case scenario in this story. In a parking lot of an apartment complex, there was a car, and inside the car were the bodies of Savanah and Matthew. They had been shot. They had gunshot wounds to their heads. Now, not only were they gone, so was baby Fabian, that boy who was going to be brought into the world on Saturday when Savanah was going to be induced. Matthew's family posted on Facebook that their lives were changed forever, and they would never be able to hold their grandson. Now, it was on police to figure out how this happened. Who did this?
It appears to be a very complex crime scene, very perplexing crime scene.
Police knew it was the work of someone else because there was no murder weapon inside the vehicle. As police worked the case, they also released this video, and this was key. It showed people who originally they described as persons of interest in this case. You can see the dark colored pickup truck pull up alongside a silver Kia, and that Kia is Matthew Guerra's car. But police said when this video was taken, he was already dead. So someone else was driving the Kia. Now, as the video goes on, you see the driver of the pickup walk over to the Kia and they have a conversation. Again, there's someone else driving Matthew's car. Then they walk back to their vehicle and both cars drive away. Now, it was critical evidence, but at the end of the day, it's just two cars in a parking lot. You don't really get a good glimpse of the people in that video. You kind of see the body type, but that's it. How do you figure out who they are? Well, the major clue that broke this case, it was a clue that was left behind by the girl who did not get a chance to become a mom.
One of the key pieces of evidence that we did collect at the scene was Savanah's cell phone. And that was handed over to our tech our technology team, who was able to download some information on there. With the assistance of the U.S. Secret Service, we were able to get enough information, and so that information was given to our detectives today. With that information, the detectives were able to find a possible location of where the suspect vehicle that was released on that surveillance camera, the surveillance video, possible location where that suspect vehicle might be. They made that location, and sure enough, the vehicle was there. They did a little bit of surveillance on the video or on the vehicle, and then were able to determine which house it belonged to.
The cell phone led them to a man named Christopher Preciado. And then there was a second suspect. Shockingly, Christopher's dad, Ramon, was also arrested. Now, police say these lives were lost. Savanah, the expectant mom, Matthew, the expectant dad, the baby boy, all of them, according to police, lost over a deal for some weed. Christopher was allegedly selling to Matthew with Savanah in the car, and something happened, and then Christopher allegedly killed Matthew and Savanah. Now, Christopher is still facing charges. He's actually slated to go on trial next year, and he has claimed self-defense in this case. Christopher is facing capital murder, abuse of a corpse, and tampering with evidence. His dad, Ramon, said this as he was being escorted in front of cameras by police. That was according to WBIA TV, calling the accusations fake news. He's charged with tampering with evidence and abuse of a corpse. Now, this is where Myrta Romanos enters this story, Christopher's stepmom. She was arrested in January of 2024, and she is accused, or was accused, of helping dump Savanah and Matthew's bodies. Now, she allegedly told police that she didn't know that the murders had happened, and she wasn't in the truck in the surveillance video that we showed you. But police say they ended up finding more footage that showed she was in the truck, and it showed her unloading items after allegedly helping Christopher and Ramon dump the bodies. Police also say that she told them that no one had access to her room where the gun used in the murders was kept. Now, this gun is very key when it comes to the developments this week and Romanos' charges being dropped. Again, jury selection in San Antonio in Romanos' trial, that was underway Wednesday morning. But the prosecution this week had requested that this case be postponed. KSAT reported on Tuesday that prosecutors had said that part of the reason they wanted a delay was because of a backlog at the Bexar County Crime Lab that's in charge of analyzing the alleged murder weapon in this case for DNA and fingerprints. The judge denied the request to delay the trial, and the charges against Romanos were dropped. Now, I want to show you this video here from KSAT TV. This is Romanos walking out of the jail that she's been in since the start of last year when she was arrested.
Do you have anything to say to the victims? Anything to say to their families?
Romanos didn't say anything to reporters on her way out of that jail, but here's what her defense attorney told the media outside of court per News 4.
We were set for trial, and the state dismissed all of her cases.
Now, this doesn't mean that Romanos is innocent related to the allegations that she faced, that she helped hide these bodies after her stepson allegedly executed Savanah, Matthew, and their unborn child. The state will be able, if they choose, to refile this case against Romanos, so it is possible that she could be arrested again and face similar charges in the future. Joining us now from Texas to talk more about this case is Anthony Asso, criminal defense attorney, former assistant district attorney. Thank you for being with us on Law and Crime. And I think a lot of people are shocked to know that this woman who was facing these allegations of allegedly helping cover up the murder of Savanah Soto, her boyfriend, and their unborn child, that she would actually be able to walk right out of jail after 2 years behind bars. Just walk us through what happened yesterday leading to this decision.
Sure. So, Chris, my understanding is that that she was set for trial, which is, the jury selection was supposed to take place yesterday. And so right up before the jury walks in the hall for jury selection, my understanding is that the state moved for a continuance for several reasons. I think that there was some evidence that was still pending in the case. I also think that they didn't have a witness, or that one of their witnesses couldn't be present for trial. And as a result, they filed a motion for continuance, which was denied by the judge. I think the defense was ready to move forward, considering that their client, Ms. Soto, had been in custody for up to 2 years at that point. And so the judge denied that motion for continuance. And as a result, the state had to dismiss the cases.
What do you make of the judge's decision to do that? I mean, it has been, Myrta Romanos was arrested in January 2024, and she's been in jail ever since, kind of waiting for this to go forward. What do you make of the judge's decision to just dismiss, to allow the charges to be dismissed, to not allow this continuance to happen?
Well, I think that the judge's job is to kind of counterbalance the fact that that Ms. Romanos is innocent until proven guilty. She's been sitting in custody for 2 years at that point, and she's entitled to a speedy trial. So I think in the judge's eyes, the state has had long enough of a time to prepare to try her case. The judge didn't dismiss the charges with prejudice. That means that at any time the state can then refile these cases against Ms. Romanos and move forward. I imagine if the state does that the judge would likely set the cases for trial pretty quickly in an effort to get that matter resolved.
I know you don't practice in where this is happening in San Antonio, but the part of the reason that the prosecution had asked for a continuance was the Bexar County Crime Lab has just taken a really long time to process the alleged murder weapon, the DNA, the fingerprints, and they just don't have that yet. Is that uncommon to have, for it to be, again, almost 2 years and they don't have that type of evidence, the prosecution, that they would have been able to use at this trial?
Well, Chris, I'll go wherever my clients take me, but to answer your question, no, it's not uncommon. When you're talking about cities like San Antonio, Dallas, Houston, for example, large metropolitan cities where you have a significant amount of cases that involve any type of scientific type evidence that would require a crime lab to be involved, whether that be DNA, lab testing for narcotics, things of that nature, you're going to get a huge backlog. And oftentimes charges are filed and then an investigation continues to unfold. And in that situation, investigators and prosecutors might not decide that certain items need to be tested for months and sometimes, unfortunately, years after a criminal defendant is actually charged. So it's not uncommon for there to be a backlog or for there to be delays in trial due to waiting on evidence from the crime lab.
When this happens and you have someone who was accused of pretty brutal accusations, if they're true, that she, this woman, her boyfriend, their unborn child, they were going to, she was going to be induced on the day that she went missing, that she helped cover all of this up, for her to just walk out of jail. Is this, even if the system is having a challenge when it comes to the crime lab and forever, is this a bad look for prosecutors that something like this would happen? Or is it just more kind of just the system is in a tough place where they just couldn't get the evidence in time?
I think it's a bad look for prosecutors, Chris. I think that in a case this high profile, this serious, you've got to have your T's crossed and your I's dotted, and you've got to be on your game. I do think from a strategic standpoint, the prosecutors probably weren't inclined to try her case prior to trying Christian Palacios, the shooter in this case's trial, because they're going to have to call a lot of similar witnesses. And once they do that in trial, they're going to create a record. And from a prosecutor's perspective, they want to get the first bite of the apple. They don't want to have multiple versions of witnesses' testimony so that the defense can then harp on that and try and find inconsistencies and also sort of learn the state's game plan.
For Myrta Romanos right now and her legal situation, because she's not accused of anything officially at this point anymore. She's at home right now. How long could this kind of hover over her head? If it takes forever for the crime lab to eventually process this, how long do prosecutors have if they want to refile these charges against her?
So until the statute of limitations runs out, that period has likely told as a result of her being charged with the crime and held in custody, which means essentially that there's been a pause in the statute of limitations. But they have until the statute of limitations runs out, which in her case is, my understanding would be, I think, 5 years for felonies in the state of Texas, because she's not charged with murder. And murder in the state of Texas has a lifetime statute of limitations, which means that if the murder happened 20 years ago, she could be charged up until the day she dies. So about a 5-year timeline of this potentially being charged and hanging over her head.
I'm sure there's some tough conversations going on inside the district attorney's office after this happened yesterday. What's the game plan potentially for a prosecutor's office going forward? Where certainly there's going to be a lot of criticism coming, and this case is very high profile and has been since it happened. What do prosecutors do now? Clearly you're waiting for this gun to come back with the evidence. Like, what more can you do?
Well, they've got a few options. I think that an aggressive prosecution would likely reach out to the defense attorney and state, look, is she willing to be a witness in this case against her son and husband? It's likely not going to happen, but that's a step that they could take in an effort to get a solid witness that could provide direct evidence of the murders in these cases. So they could do that, and their bargaining chip there is, look, we won't refile these cases, or we'll offer her a certain reasonable punishment range in exchange for her testimony. And when we refile, she can take the plea and maybe plead to a probation where she'll avoid having to go back into custody. So that's sort of the bargaining chip on the state's behalf. I don't know what pretrials offers the state had made to the defense, but it seems like the defense was set and ready to go to trial this week. So it'll be interesting to see whether or not they're looking to even negotiate and put their client in that position.
And I guess going forward, if she were to be arrested again, I mean, last time she spent from January of last year up until yesterday in jail. Would all of this that took place, the charges being dropped, potentially impact what her bond conditions could look like the second time around? Or is everything kind of isolated just based on the accusations that, you know, she'll face if there's a new indictment that comes down?
I think that it will absolutely affect what her future bond would be, Chris. I think that the judge's determination to deny the state's motion for continuance is a display of the judge's viewpoint of the timeline in this case. The judge thinks clearly that this case should have gone to trial, that she's been sitting in custody long enough, and that the state needs to get moving with it. So I imagine that if the state was to refile cases, that the judge would likely set a bond where the defendant could be out on pretrial supervision and not sit in custody awaiting trial. Or if the judge was going to set a high bond, it would be with a rapid trial date so that the defendant wasn't sitting in custody for a long period of time.
Her stepson is slated to go on trial February of next year, and he's the one who's accused of pulling the trigger, killing these two people and their unborn child. This case happened around Christmas 2023, and he's not going to go on trial until 2026. I know it's a complicated case with multiple victims, multiple suspects, but what do you just make of the timeline of how long it's taking to actually get to the point where his case would actually go to trial?
Well, oftentimes when you're dealing with capital murders, you've got loads of discovery, whether that be cell phone evidence, multiple witnesses, different areas of the crime scene, right? This is a case where there was a crime scene where the bodies were found. There were two separate crime scenes between the two vehicles. There was a crime scene at Ms. Romanos' house where the gun was ultimately found. So there's a lot of DNA testing and processing going on in this case. Cell phones, looking for surveillance. So things like that tend to drag the case out. But also, when dealing with capital murder, the results are really harsh and really drastic. And it can be a long, drawn-out appeal process that is expensive for the state to litigate. And so you often see judges as well as the defense and state making sure that everything is done correctly for the defense set up the case for the appeal process, and from the state's perspective to make sure that if they get a conviction, it's not overturned 10, 15 years down the line.
This next question is incredibly basic, but I also think it's good to kind of remind people watching this. When we say that someone has the right to a speedy trial, because you would think in the case of Myrta Romanos, where you're arrested in early 2024, and then you're held on charges that were eventually dismissed for 2 years, what does that actually mean when you say that someone has the right to a speedy trial and what that looks like?
Well, it means that it's different federally and in state court. In federal court, there's a statute that states that once you're indicted, you get a trial on a certain date. And federal courts their docket loads might be a little less, and they're able to kind of abide by a statute like that. In state court, it just means it's kind of, I don't want to call it arbitrary, but it is undefined. But it means exactly that. The defendant has a right to a speedy trial. There's case law that kind of dictates how that applies, whether it means they have a speedy trial when a defendant is not charged with a crime or charged with a crime. But in terms of what we're talking about here, it means that a defendant shouldn't have to sit in custody for 3 years before they go to trial. The unfortunate reality is that there are a lot of defendants waiting for their trials in San Antonio. And so the judge, they'll set it for trial, but ultimately they can only try so many cases at a time.
And then just lastly, and I know we were talking about kind of the timeline where you have the person who's accused of the murder, he was slated to go on trial after the person who's accused of covering up the murder was going to go until her charges were dismissed. How could, if he, say, is found something, evidence comes forward and shows he wasn't the shooter, he was found not guilty, we'll see how that plays out. Like, how does that impact the other cases where his dad and now stepmom, they're facing charges of covering up a murder that he hasn't even been convicted of yet? Like, how does that case impact the other ones?
That's a good question. And it's actually something I'm dealing with in one of my personal cases. And so I think as it relates to this case, the issue will be really whether Mr. Palacios was acting in self-defense, like he stated in his interview to the police, or not. And if a jury was to find that he was acting in self-defense and that he didn't commit murder, then it would affect the charges with regard to his father and stepmother if they were charged as accessories in the case. But in Ms. Romanos' case, she's charged with tampering and destruction of evidence. So the fact that Mr. Palacios was acquitted alone probably wouldn't resolve her charges. However, I think practically speaking, it would significantly it would have a significant impact on how the state viewed Ms. Romanos in terms of what they thought the correct punishment was during pretrial negotiations.
And then as far as Ms. Romanos, now that she's out, and I know you used to work in a prosecutor's office, I mean, how likely is it that law enforcement is like keeping an eye on her? Like, what can law enforcement do at this point if she's not facing any charges where it doesn't violate her rights, but I'm sure they also kind of want to know where she is since she was accused in such a terrible crime?
I think law enforcement is waiting for a mess up. I think she needs to look over her shoulder both ways when she crosses the street. You've got a family of the victims in this case that are super upset, and rightfully so. And so the state, I think, in the community's viewpoint, sort of dropped the ball on this one. And so if the state has an opportunity to make it right, whether it be through filing of another charge, they're going to take every opportunity to do so. And so for Ms. Romanos, she's definitely got to stay on a straight and narrow.
Yeah, and we'll see what happens next. Her stepson slated to go on trial, accused of these murders in February of next year. Anthony Osso, criminal defense attorney, former assistant district attorney. Thank you, sir, for taking the time to be with us on Law and Crime. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.